Dear friends, climate change creates one of the greatest threats to human rights in the 21st century. Ultimately, there can be no jobs on a dead planet and no human rights on a dead planet because there will be no human beings on a dead planet. I believe there is no alternative but for Amnesty to rise to the challenge. A climate catastrophe is already unfolding. The rights and livelihoods of affected communities around the world are already under attack. And without radical, urgent action now, climate change could genuinely end humanity. The urgency has become even clearer after, in October 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said very clearly, we've got 12 years to get emissions to peak and start coming down if we are not to overshoot the 1.5-degree goal. And should we do that, essentially, we are on the pathway to irreversible, runaway, catastrophic climate change. The IPCC window of 144 months, let me say that again, 144 months to avert climate catastrophe is already a conservative warning typical of this scientific body. This really is not a deadline we can afford to allow the world to ignore. And let us remember that we are not talking about the future threats. Right now, people are facing heat waves, droughts, floods that are made worse by climate change. Every day, governments, companies, insurers, and banks are making decisions that worsen the problem. Every day, opportunities are being squandered. If we limit global average temperatures to 1.5 degrees, and bear in mind we're already at 1.1 degree, we would prevent several 100 million people from facing poverty by 2050. We would protect 10 million people from flooding-related risks of death and displacement. We would reduce the risk of catastrophic sea rises. But if we go beyond 1.5 degrees, the consequences will be massive and huge. To give one example, health-related deaths and water shortages are expected to dramatically increase. The longer the world waits, the harder it becomes to solve the problem. And to be clear, we have a very, very narrow window of opportunity, literally months, right? Before we are unable to say that we can actually address the crisis that we've known about for decades and decades. When I joined Amnesty, we had already started developing an ambitious strategy on climate change. In fact, Amnesty entered the climate change fight in the Copenhagen climate negotiations in 2009. I want us now to take this forward and accelerate our engagement through all the tools at our disposal. It will require us to reduce our own environmental footprint as well. It will require us to look at your existing programs and climatize it. It will require us to put our money where our mouth is, and it is on this last point that I would like to speak to you now. Since 2015, civil society organizations have been calling on governments to transition rapidly towards renewable energy and away from fossil fuels. We have advised NGOs that are taking Shell to court as Amnesty for its failure to move towards clean energy. However, we cannot credibly continue to do this if we give on the one hand and take with the other. As we speak, we are organizing with partners an Urgency for Human Survival Civil Society Summit for September 2019. We want to galvanize human rights groups to join hands with the climate justice movement, including on efforts to end the fossil fuel economy. We now need to ensure that Amnesty is not making any investments in fossil fuels, but rather in clean energy that advances human rights instead of taking it away. This is a moral issue, and it is also a reputational issue. Many of our partners, including many youth movements, are calling on institutions around the world, from universities to pension funds to foundations to the United Nations itself, to religious institutions and so on, to divest from fossil fuels. To deal with this question, the International Board has called for Amnesty's first ever emergency global assembly. This assembly is seeking to ensure that Amnesty rises to the biggest challenge that humanity faces now. This Global Assembly is to ensure that Amnesty is doing its part to defend humanity from the greatest human rights threat ever experienced, which is the very survival of all of humanity. I can think of no better topic for such an emergency meeting, and I thank you in advance for your support in this endeavor. Muchas gracias, merci beaucoup, shukran, sisi, thank you very, very much.